The land had forgotten how to speak. It stretched in all directions, hushed and golden, carrying the scent of old rain and sun-scorched memory. Elijah Holt walked its edges each morning like a ritual, boots heavy, steps steady, eyes fixed on a horizon that never promised change. For years, he'd lived this way, between fence posts and firewood, between sunup and the aching hush of nightfall. The cabin he built with his own hands still stood tall, but everything soft inside it had long since gone still. His wife had died 7 winters ago, and when she left, she took the color with her. Lily had been laughter and light, a hummingbird in a place of crows. He hadn't painted the porch since. The curtains were always drawn, and the only voice he heard now was the wind's, low and lonesome. That morning, he noticed something strange in the light. It moved against the road like heat shimmer, but thicker, slower, real. He squinted toward the shape, his hand lowering instinctively to the hammer at his hip. Out here, no one arrived without reason. Strangers meant questions, and questions were dangerous. She appeared like a page torn from a book he hadn't read in years. Barefoot, wrapped in a wool shawl fraying at the corners, her long braids dusty and wind-swept. Her dress was too thin for the sun. Her stride wasn't desperate, but it was deliberate, like each step was carved from some quiet resolve. When she reached the gate, she didn't lean or beg. She stood still, breathing hard, and spoke in a voice dry as August. Water? It wasn't a plea. It was a statement of need, said without apology. Elijah studied her eyes first. Dark, alert, and guarded, the kind that had seen too much and didn't flinch anymore. He nodded once, wordless, and turned toward the trough by the barn. When she followed, he dipped the tin ladle and held it out. She drank without breaking eye contact, as if she needed to know what kind of man he was before she let the cool water touch her ribs. Her hands trembled only slightly. Dust caked her toes. When she finished, she exhaled with something close to relief. "I'm Naya," she said. "I won't stay long. Just needed to stop." Elijah tipped his hat slightly, the closest thing he'd done to introducing himself in years. "Elijah Holt. This land's mine. Water's free." A pause. The kind that opens space between two people who don't yet know how close they can stand. "Do you have a shaded spot?" she asked. "I can sit out back if you'd rather not invite me in." He considered her a moment, then nodded toward the cottonwood by the east field. She walked toward it, her shoulders tight, her steps unhurried. Elijah watched until she disappeared behind the bend, then returned to chopping wood. His hands moved with practiced rhythm, but his thoughts did not. They kept returning to the way she hadn't said thank you, and how that somehow made it feel more honest. By dusk, she was still there, curled against the base of the tree, her knees drawn up, her shawl pulled high around her shoulders. Elijah brought her bread and jerky wrapped in cloth, and left it on a flat stone nearby. She didn't look at him, but she murmured, "Thank you," low and worn, like the word had been sitting too long in her chest. He didn't ask who she was running from. Not yet. He only asked, "You got somewhere you're headed?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not yet. I left something I couldn't carry anymore." That night he didn't sleep. The wind picked up, brushing leaves against the cabin roof, whispering in ways that reminded him of Lily's voice when she used to read by the fire. He didn't know why this girl unsettled him so. Maybe it was the silence she wore like armor. Maybe it was the way she didn't ask for more. When dawn broke, he found her sitting by the barn, the food cloth folded neatly beside her. She was mending one of her sleeves with a thorn needle and thread she'd pulled from her shawl's edge. "You sew?" he asked. "Better than I speak," she said, with the hint of a smile. He gestured toward the cabin. "There's a rocking chair that needs stitching. Used to be my wife's." She didn't ask for details, just nodded. They worked without speaking for the better part of the morning. Elijah fixed a broken hinge. Naya reinforced the chair's seat. By the time midday sun pressed down on the yard, the silence between them had softened into something nearly companionable. "You got folks looking for you?" he asked at last. "Maybe," she said, "but not the kind who asked first." That answered more than it didn't. He didn't press. The land had taught him long ago that some things flower only when left alone. That evening, He found her looking at the sunflowers, wilted, browning, but still standing. "Did she plant those?" she asked. He nodded. "They're still here," she said. "So am I," he replied. And something in that answer must have settled her, because that night she slept inside, on the old couch, wrapped in a quilt that still smelled faintly of lavender and ash. He stayed in the chair, one boot planted against the floor, his rifle nearby. Not because he feared her, but because the world out there didn't care for quiet things. When he looked at her before drifting off, her features soft in the lantern light, he thought, she doesn't belong to the wind anymore. Not entirely. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man buried beneath his own roof. The days slipped into a rhythm neither of them named. Naya rose early and moved through Elijah's world like someone trying not to disturb a sleeping animal. She fed the hens without being asked, swept the porch with the quiet discipline of someone raised to be useful. Elijah, in turn, spoke more than he had in years, not in long stretches, but in scattered fragments. Comments about the weather, notes on the soil, a joke, once, about the mule being the only creature more stubborn than he was. Naya didn't laugh out loud, but her lips curled just enough for him to notice. Still, there was something in her gaze that never rested. Her eyes always flicked toward the ridgeline, toward the place where the land blurred into sky. It wasn't wanderlust. It was wariness, the kind carved into someone who knows being found could be worse than being lost. He didn't ask what she had run from. He only asked what she needed. And what she needed, it seemed, was to be left alone beside someone who understood how silence could be an act of grace. But the town had eyes. Word spread fast through Willow Creek. Elijah Holt, the reclusive widower with a soul stitched in shadows, had taken in a stranger, a girl not from town, not from anywhere anyone recognized. She hadn't bought fabric or sugar, hadn't sat through Sunday sermons, hadn't explained herself to anyone. That was enough. May Tiller was the first to say it aloud, over a sack of flour and a pile of gossip at the general store. She's native or half. You can see it in the cheekbones. Pretty but wild-looking. Not the kind that stays. The sheriff heard it next. Sheriff Rowe, a man more concerned with appearances and peace, visited the ranch in the guise of a courtesy check. He rode in at dusk, boots dusty and demeanor tight. The kind of man who spoke in laws rather than kindness. Naya stayed inside when he arrived, watching to the curtain like prey trained to expect the snap of a snare. Elijah stood on the porch, arms crossed, unshaken. "She got a name?" Rowe asked. "She's not a problem." Elijah answered. "That's not what I asked." Elijah didn't blink. "Her name's Naya. That's all you need." The sheriff shifted in his saddle, annoyance tightening his jaw. "You know how this looks, Holt. Folks are talking." Elijah looked past him, toward the horizon where the sky bled orange behind the hills. Let M. That was the end of it, for the moment. But trouble never comes once and leaves. That night, Naya sat at the kitchen table, sewing a tear in one of Elijah's old flannel shirts. Her fingers worked with quiet purpose, but her shoulders held a stiffness he couldn't ignore. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked gently. She didn't look up. "Every morning," she said, "and every evening I decide not to." He leaned against the counter, hands clasped loosely. "You think they'll come looking?" "They already are," she said, "but they won't find me easy." He studied her then, not just her face, but her posture, the set of her jaw, the calm tension in her limbs. She was a survivor, shaped not by freedom but by escape. And something in him, something long buried beneath grief and routine, stirred to protect her. The next morning, he saddled the mule and hitched the wagon. "We're going into town," he said. She hesitated. "Are you sure that's wise?" "No," he said, "but I reckon we both had enough of hiding." They rode in together, side by side, not as man and wife, not as anything defined, but as two souls refusing to bend. The stairs started before they even hit the main road. Children paused in their play. Storekeepers leaned just a little too far over their counters. But Elijah kept his gaze forward, and Naya held her chin high. At the general store, he bought flour, coffee, and nails. She picked out 2 buttons and a length of faded calico. No one spoke to them, but the silence was louder than words. As they loaded the wagon, May Tiller stepped forward. Is she staying? Elijah paused. Looks that way. May's eyes narrowed. She don't belong here. Hope. He looked at Naya, then back to May. Neither do I some days. That night, Naya didn't eat much. She folded the calico into a drawer and stood on the porch long after the sun had set. Elijah joined her, the air between them thick with unspoken things. They'll turn on you, she said. You know that. He nodded. Let them. She looked at him then, truly looked, and something shifted, not in a flash, not in a burst, but in the slow, irrevocable way of fire catches beneath a blanket of dry leaves. I don't know how to stay, she said, voice raw. You don't have to, he replied. You just have to stop running. She closed her eyes, let out a breath that had been hiding in her ribs for years. I don't want to be a burden. You're not, he said. You're a beginning. And though no one spoke of love, not yet, not aloud, something passed between them in the dark. A tether, a thread, a reason. In the fields beyond the fence line, the wind picked up, but this time it didn't feel empty. This time, it carried the scent of something new. The sound came low and steady. Hooves in the distance, too many to be aimless, too deliberate to be friendly. Elijah was at the fence post tightening a wire when he heard them, and his body, though aged by grief more than years, tense like it remembered things he'd once chosen to forget. He stood slowly, wiping his palms on his trousers, and turned toward the road. Naya was already standing on the porch, the wind tugging at her shawl, her eyes fixed on the approaching silhouettes. She wasn't afraid, not in the way most might be, but her shoulders lifted, braced, as if she had finally grown tired of running, and was ready to meet whatever came. There were 7 riders. They came in tight formation, their horses breathing hard, their faces set in the quiet determination of men who had ridden through night and doubt. At the front rode a man with a falcon feather tied to his braid, Greyhawk, Naya's brother. She stepped down from the porch without hesitation and walked toward him across the brittle grass. No words were exchanged at first. She reached him, placed her hand over his heart, and leaned her forehead gently against his. A gesture of reunion, a language of its own. Greyhawk looked past her, his gaze settling on Elijah. He dismounted with the quiet grace of a man used to being unseen. You gave her water, he said, voice rough and weather-worn. You gave her time. Elijah nodded once. Didn't see a reason not to. Greyhawk studied him a moment longer, then turned to Naya. They're coming. Not our people. The ones you left behind. The sheriff's helping them. Naya didn't blink, then let them come. She stood beside Elijah now, not behind him. He noticed a shift without needing to name it. That evening, as the riders disappeared into the tree line to take watch from the hills, Elijah and Naya sat by the fire in the small room that had once been Lily's sewing corner. Neither spoke for a long while. Outside, the night thickened, and the wind carried rumors no ear could trust. Greyhawk thinks I should leave, she said softly. Do you want to? I don't know what I want anymore, she admitted, but I know I'm tired of losing things. He stirred the fire, the embers glowing orange, throwing shadows across their faces. I lost someone once, he said. I thought that meant I'd lost everything. But then you came and drank from my cup like it mattered, like it wasn't just a kindness, but a kind of choosing. She looked at him, her voice no louder than a breath. Would you choose me now, knowing what's coming? He didn't hesitate. I already did. Before dawn they came, not in fury, but in numbers. 4 riders, the sheriff at the front, his badge catching the first light of morning. Behind him, 2 well-dressed men with clean boots and cold stares. Naya's would be suitors or their hired men, the kind who spoke in threats but only once, because they expected obedience the first time. Elijah stood on the porch, rifle slung but untouched. Naya stood beside him. Greyhawk and his scouts flanked the tree line, silent, unmoving. They were not here to attack. They were here to witness. Sheriff Rowe cleared his throat. This girl is owed back. Her people have claim. She is not property, Elijah said. She is promised. When the men snapped. to a man with land and law on his side. Naya stepped forward. I promise nothing. You were spoken for. I speak for myself now, she said. The men began to dismount, but Greyhawk's voice sliced the air. You'll take no step further. It was then that something shifted, not in them, but in the land itself. The air grew still. The wind hushed, as if all creation leaned in to listen. Elijah took Naya's hand, not possessively, not protectively, but openly. She stays, he said, not because I said so, but because she chooses it. And in that moment, Naya did something neither lawman nor tribe nor stranger could undo. She reached back, fingers wrapped around Elijah's callous grip, and she stood taller than she ever had. The men paused. Something in their certainty fractured. The sheriff looked around, at the line of silent men in the trees, at the woman who no longer flinched, at the farmer who no longer bowed. Then he turned his horse without a word and rode away. The others followed. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like breath returning. That night, the cabin felt different, as if Lily herself had exhaled and let go. The air was softer. The silence no longer hollow. Elijah poured 2 cups of coffee and set one across from him at the table. Naya joined him. She wore no braid that night. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, and her eyes, once guarded, now held something close to peace. You didn't have to stay, he said. I know, she answered. That's why I did. There was no declaration, no kiss, no music rising with the stars. Just the scrape of 2 chairs pulled closer, and the warmth of hands finding home again. In the fields outside, the river carved a path through earth it had not touched in months. It ran backward that night, not because nature had changed, but because the heart sometimes finds its way against the current, because healing, like rivers, doesn't always move in straight lines. And if there is a lesson at all, it is this. Love doesn't always arrive shouting or sure. Sometimes it shows up thirsty. Sometimes it simply asks for water. And sometimes, if you're still enough to answer, it gives you a reason to live again.